Right, so when you look into the history of WWE and just the sheer amount of wrestlers that have been signed to WWE, it likely spans into the thousands, with WWE being around for over 70 years and just so many wrestlers having came and gone from the company. And obviously there isn't room for everyone to get a push. Like I said, there have been thousands of wrestlers in the company and not all of them can receive a substantial push, but also a select few can fall off from their WWE careers in some of the craziest ways possible. And that's exactly what we're here to talk about today, as we have a big long compilation of some of the biggest and most major downfalls in WWE. So like this video and let's just get into it. In 2003, Chris Masters signed for the WWE, and this came after a years-long pursuit to obtain the perfect physique that would interest WWE in picking him up, and that hard work had paid off. And after a couple of years in OVW, he made his main roster debut in 2005 as the masterpiece Chris Masters, and very soon into his WWE run, he would introduce the Master Lock Challenge. With his claim that his full Nelson submission hold known as the Master Lock was unbreakable, and every week a challenger would step up to try and break it and fail. And nobody was safe from the Master Lock Challenge, whether you were a current WWE wrestler, a legend, or even a woman. In August of that year as well, himself and Carlito would form a heel tag team and actually work their way up the card to be involved in some main event angles. As before the year ended, Shawn Michaels would have a feud with Chris Masters, and Chris Masters would also go after John Cena's WWE Championship, with himself and Carlito both being in the 2006 Elimination Chamber to start the next year off, challenging for the spinner belt, but John Cena would retain in this match, with the two of them being the final eliminations. And then going into WrestleMania 22 that year, Chris Masters and Carlito were set to challenge Big Show and Kane for their tag titles, with apparently the original plan seeing Chris Masters and Carlito to win the belts. But this would end up not happening because once again, apparently these plans were abruptly changed just the day before, with them not getting the win, and instead the team would break up at the show, with Carlito turning face on Chris Masters. And following a program and a match between the two, which was won by Carlito, Chris Masters would then pursue the Intercontinental title, and once again, Masters was supposedly originally planned to win the belt. However, right before the match was set to happen, WWE caught on to Masters' addiction to prescription painkillers, with an intervention being staged, and he was sent to rehab for some time away from WWE TV. And when Masters did eventually return back to WWE, he looked a lot more lean, and despite the various title wins and plans falling through, the one thing that Chris Masters still had to his name was the Master Lock Challenge, which still 2 years on nobody had ever broke. Well, that was until March of 2007 when Bobby Lashley would officially beat the Master Lock Challenge, putting an end to the 2-year streak, and now Chris Masters kind of had nothing going for him. A couple of months later, he would be suspended for 30 days for a wellness policy violation, and this didn't really come as a surprise because a lot of people in WWE were popping around this time. The Benoit tragedy had just happened, and WWE had put a much stricter enforcement on their wellness policy, so Masters, along with numerous other wrestlers, was suspended at this time. Unfortunately for Masters though, he was suspended yet again soon after returning from this suspension, and then just a few days later was released from the WWE as a whole. As Chris Masters would go to work the independent scene for a bit, but he would make his WWE return in 2009, and it was funny because they kind of just acted like he never left and was never gone anywhere. But now in this second run, Chris Masters was totally reduced to a comedy jobber role with no Master Lock Challenge anymore, and instead his main gimmick was that he would shake his moves. Yeah, I don't really know how to describe it, but if you knew about Chris Masters at this time, you get me. If you get me, you get me. And yeah, Chris Masters in this run really just did a whole lot of nothing, as he spent the next few years just working in the lower card, hardly ever winning a match, often reduced to working superstars or just being a body in a battle royal. And after just over 2 years in this second run, he was once again released from WWE for a second time in August of 2011, with once again it not really coming as a surprise due to the fact that WWE clearly weren't interested in pushing him. And Chris Masters does still still wrestles to this day 15 years on from his WWE release under the name of Chris Adonis. And you might remember or recognize Chris Adonis most recently from his run in the NWA a couple of years ago where he did win the national title, so he got some title success somewhere at least. And between his WWE release and his NWA run, he also had a TNA run, and he has since expressed interest in appearing in a Royal Rumble match for WWE, which I would like to see, to be honest. But yeah, safe to say when you look at Chris Masters' tenures in WWE, they were anything but a masterpiece. As pre-WWE, Lacey Evans had a bit of experience on the independent scene as she had wrestled on the indie circuit from 2014 until 2016, but even before that she had served in the United States military, serving in the Marine Corps. She served in the Marine Corps from 2009 to 2014 for 5 years and was actually introduced to professional wrestling while in the Marines through a staff sergeant who promoted indie shows. And it was only a couple of years into her wrestling career that the Federation came knocking and Lacey Evans was signed to a WWE developmental contract on April 12, 2016, being assigned to NXT, and she began training at the Performance Center. And she would make her debut on an NXT live event just 6 months later, at first under her real name of Macy Estrella, and going into 2017 she would start making her first appearances on NXT TV where she was just wrestling in jobber matches for the most part, and that year she was also given her permanent ring name of Lacey Evans. But yeah, this year 2017 that Lacey spent in NXT was just spent entirely as a jobber. A lot of the time she was a face in Battle Royals, she didn't really have any programs or feuds or really had been explained to the WWE audience at all. The biggest thing she was a part of this year was she was a part of the Mae Young Classic tournament, the inaugural one, where in the first round she would defeat Tainara Conti, of course Ty Mello in AEW, before losing to Toni Storm in the second round. But it's 2018, that would be a new beginning for Lacey Evans in WWE, as at the start of the year she was established as a heel and would actually start getting some airtime in NXT and actually start having some feuds with many of the top talent in NXT's women's division, like Kairi Sane, Dakota Kai, and Candice LeRae. And her entire gimmick basically was tradwife. She was a very nice, lovely lady, a very traditional lady who upheld traditional values and, you know, used it to her wrestling style, I guess. Not a bad basis for a character or a gimmick at all in wrestling. It's the kind of gimmick that would probably work, but the execution is definitely something to talk about. During 2018, she would start picking up more wins in NXT, even going on a win streak before she was suddenly called up to the main roster. As if you don't remember, the main roster in 2018 to 2019 for WWE was maybe putting on the worst wrestling of all time and is one of the worst eras for WWE ever. And at the end of the year, it was suddenly announced that Lacey Evans alongside Lars Sullivan, EC3, Nikki Cross, Otis and Tucker were being called up to the main roster, all 6 of them at once. It was a move that was very clearly being done in direct response to just how bad the TV shows were and attendances going down and ratings dropping. I guess they thought fans wanted to see new fresh talent, which yes we did, but none of these guys were ever explained to any of the fans, and the fans were given no reason to care about them at all. And especially when they are booked the way they are, of course the fans are never gonna care about them. EC3 and his booking and his downfall that he had upon this call-up is one thing, but Lacey Evans' story is definitely another. As Lacey Evans for the first couple of months of this main roster run just did absolutely nothing. All she ever did was interrupt people's segments or matches to come out and do a little strut for her entrance and wave to the crowd and do whatever and just be a lady, I guess. As she did the Royal Rumble match, entering the match at number 1, but then just wasn't wrestling. They only ever used her to do this, interrupting segments. Even on pay-per-view she was doing this. And post-WrestleMania she would be drafted to the Raw brand officially, finally finding a brand to actually be on. Yes, that's right, she was called up to the main roster with no brand assigned, she just appeared on both shows waving. And now on Raw she would finally get something to sink her teeth into as she would begin feuding with Raw Women's Champion Becky Lynch and oh god, this feud. That's right, Becky Lynch's first Raw Women's Championship feud after winning the belt in a long-awaited moment was Lacey Evans, who hadn't been established to the fans whatsoever and had no momentum, no wins, no real kayfabe reason she should be the #1 contender, but she was. They faced off at Money in the Bank, with Becky Lynch of course coming out on top, but after the match was over, Lacey Evans would attack Becky Lynch, and then minutes later, Charlotte Flair would come out for her match with Becky Lynch, who was also the SmackDown Women's Champion at this time, if you don't remember Becky 2 belts. And because of Lacey Evans, Becky Lynch ended up losing that match to Charlotte Flair, thus losing one of the belts already. So now Becky Lynch, who was holding 2 championship belts and had won them just a month prior in the main event of WrestleMania, now only had 1 belt, and the other belt she was feuding with Lacey Evans of all people over. Bruv, it's not looking good. And well, things would only get worse from here, as Lacey Evans would continue on feuding with Becky Lynch, as she even faced her once again at Stomping Ground, with Becky Lynch once again coming out on top. And you'd think that after beating her twice, this feud would finally be over, but nah, let's go ahead and mix this feud with Seth Rollins and Baron Corbin's feud, which is equally just as worse, as WWE made the decision to start acknowledging Seth Rollins and Becky Lynch as an on-screen couple, with both of them being champions. And hey, why not book a mixed tag team feud against both their current rivals of Baron Corbin and Lacey Evans? Yes, this is how they were treating the world title scenes in 2019. And yeah, like I said, this became the program. It was a mixed tag program, and everything about this feud was just absolutely awful. To be fair, other than the match itself, the mixed tag match they had at Extreme Rules 2019, I will always say, that was a fun match. Becky Lynch got end of dazed by Baron Corbin. Crazy. But yes, Seth Rollins and Becky Lynch did win, and finally after this, Seth Rollins and Becky Lynch and Baron Corbin and Lacey Evans all went their separate ways, and the 4-month-long Lacey Evans-Becky Lynch feud that achieved nothing for either of them was finally over. Just a dominant one-sided feud which made Lacey Evans look like a total geek in kayfabe, made the fans completely resent her because they didn't know who she was up until that point. They'd been given no reason to care about her, now they especially hadn't been given any reason. And just a total waste of a historic Becky Lynch reign. Like I said, this reign began from the main event of WrestleMania, and she spent a good chunk of it feuding with Lacey Evans in this god-awful feud. And things would get even more interesting for Lacey Evans this year, as later on in that year she posted this video to social media that depicted her talking down to a police officer giving her a ticket.
No, it's a violation ticket for speeding. It's Lacey, right?
Do you know who I am?
I have no idea.
Well, I'm Lacey Evans, and I do not rate that ticket, so you can go ahead.
Lacey Evans.
WWE superstar, and you should know exactly who I am.
Sorry, ma'am, I don't. Hey, so here's the ticket. Information on the back.
You've got to be kidding me.
Yeah. So...
You nasty thing. I'll pay the ticket.
Okay, well, have a good day.
Well, don't you have a terrible day, sir. Canada is terrible, and I can't wait to get back.
Welcome to Edmonton.
Oh. You've got to be kidding, this nasty.
Lacey did confirm this was a staged interaction, but at the time she got heavy backlash for this, with people thinking that she was messing with a police officer just trying to do their job. And then as part of the 2019 draft in October, she was drafted to the SmackDown brand, and at first she would actually do some pretty cool stuff. For example, herself and Natalya faced off in Saudi Arabia, becoming the first WWE women's wrestlers to wrestle in Saudi. And after being part of the losing Team SmackDown women's team at the Brand Warfare Survivor Series that year, Lacey Evans would surprisingly turn face after she defended the SmackDown roster, who were being absolutely obliterated by Bayley on the mic, of course the women's champion at the time. And thus that would kick off a feud with Bayley over the SmackDown Women's Championship, which this definitely was not as bad as the Becky Lynch feud. I just can't really remember anything about it, and Lacey Evans' babyface character just did not hit whatsoever. The fans just didn't buy into her as a babyface. They were given no reason to cheer her on as a babyface after everything we'd seen of her in the last year, and when the pandemic struck, it only made things worse. However, she was still getting the same reaction of nothing. She lost to Bayley over the SmackDown Women's belt at WrestleMania 36, and then she was part of a 5-way elimination match for the SmackDown Women's Championship at the pandemic WrestleMania from the Performance Center, but she would also lose that thanks to interference from Sasha Banks. And with moments like this, it really felt as though WWE were teeing up Lacey Evans to be the next person to win the belt of Bayley and be the big babyface person to overcome the dastardly heel that was Bayley. However, I guess this idea just got lost in the shuffle and WWE never followed through on it, because after this, Lacey Evans was a part of the Women's Money in the Bank match, the one from WWE headquarters. I do love that match. And then about a month later, she turned heel once again, so her babyface run lasted about 5 to 6 months and was just a totally nothing run, and the fans just really didn't get behind her. The heel turn came after losing a karaoke contest to Naomi. Yes, that is a real sentence that I just said, and she would be drafted back to Raw that summer, as seemingly WWE just had no idea what to do with Lacey Evans, even down to what brand she should appear on and which one suited her more, but seemingly Raw was the answer, and boy oh boy did they have big plans for Lacey from here. As going into 2021, there would be some very interesting activity regarding Lacey Evans, as she would kick off the year by starting a feud with Charlotte Flair, a feud that began with Lacey Evans flirting with Ric Flair and distracting Charlotte Flair during one of her matches. And it would even culminate with Ric Flair becoming the manager of Lacey Evans, which he would usually manage Charlotte Flair, of course, leading to even more tension, with Lacey Evans and Charlotte Flair being penned in at WrestleMania as the plan for the women's title match. Yes, that's right, they were going to do a women's title match at WrestleMania with Lacey Evans challenging Charlotte Flair because she stole her dad. I don't even know what to say. But these plans would end up getting scrapped, as just a month after this storyline began, it was announced that Lacey Evans was actually pregnant in real life and would be stepping away from wrestling for a bit, of course. They did also imply that Ric Flair may be the father, which I'm glad is something they never followed up on and came back to, but it was heavily implied at the time. And yeah, like I said, with that, Lacey Evans would take a step back from wrestling for about a year. She was actually penciled in and announced to be facing Asuka at the Elimination Chamber event over the women's title, and she was even scheduled to win that match and win the women's title before the pregnancy. Wow, they were actually gonna do it. They were actually gonna have her beat Asuka, of all people, someone who should never be losing to Lacey Evans, so that they could do the Lacey Evans versus Charlotte Flair program. That is just crazy. Another thing going on for Lacey Evans at the start of this year was that she got into Twitter beef with the rapper Cardi B, of all people. As Cardi B, I remember around this time, was tweeting about wrestling, and seemingly there was talks of her getting involved in the company. She tweeted out a tweet about WWE, which was then quoted by Lacey Evans, clearly in character, saying, "Careful what you wish for, you nasty. We aren't Nicki Minaj. You'll get sent home with more than a busted eye." Obviously, Lacey Evans got absolutely jumped by Cardi B stan Twitter, who had no idea how wrestling characters work or that she was talking in character. They thought she was just genuinely insulting Cardi B and calling her a nasty. And it actually got a response out of Cardi B herself, which was quickly deleted. She tweeted saying, "A white woman can't never put fear on me, sweetie. Got me effed up. I was showing love to WWE the whole night yesterday. I don't know where the F you came from with your unnecessary BS." Just completely coming for Lacey Evans there. Lacey Evans versus Cardi B, book it now, which maybe, to be fair, if Lacey Evans didn't get pregnant, that could have been a possibility. And even for the women's title too, could have also been a possibility. And Lacey Evans would eventually return in Easter of 2022, however, she was having a bit of an identity crisis at this time, as WWE just had no idea what character to give her, or whether or not she should be a face or a heel, because each week it felt like she was just now a face. Oh, and now she's all of a sudden a heel again. She was using a military-based character, which at first was meant to be a babyface, but then they just had her return as a heel despite the vignette clearly teasing her as a babyface, then to just turn her back babyface a week or two later. And this character, the only thing I remember about it is that Sergeant Slaughter gave it criticism and didn't like the direction of it or how it was being written, which is a funny little thing. And other than that, she was just doing absolutely nothing in this WWE run upon her return, as once again, they just had no idea what to even do with her, and she was just stuck in limbo. And in the summer of 2023, Lacey Evans would suddenly disappear from WWE TV, and sure enough, in August of 2023, she was released released from her WWE contract officially. And with Lacey Evans now out of the WWE, she officially left the wrestling business as a whole, leaving the business behind her with the WWE release. And nowadays, Lacey Evans runs her own cafe, which she opened, and is not involved in wrestling whatsoever, has never made any more wrestling appearances, and from the looks of it, is never going to. After leaving WWE, she did an interview with Chris Van Vliet where she stated that WWE was never her passion, so I guess it makes sense why she was never given a concentrated push and why she's not returned back to the industry since her release. And another funny thing about Lacey Evans post WWE that I remember about her is that she went on Mandy Rose's podcast.
I don't give a shit, you know, like you can't cancel me at this point, and not that I gave a shit to begin with. Back then, how I lasted 7 years in WWE, I have no idea. The same mouth was the same one backstage. I can't tell you how many damn fights I almost got into, and I verbally told them every time, I'll work at McDonald's before I ever sit back and have anybody talk to me the way that you're talking to me, because you feel like I owe you something. The only thing I owe you is working my ass off to have a good match. Back here, there's no damn way that I'm gonna let anybody talk to me just because you've walked down a road.
Got me hyped. Let's go.
Not doing it.
I'm being so honest here. What the fuck is she actually even saying? Can anyone on the planet decipher what the hell she's talking about here? As I said, Ted DiBiase Jr. is a second generation wrestler, of course being the son of the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase, a WWE Hall of Famer and legend. Ted DiBiase Jr. enjoyed a stint as a wide receiver at Mississippi College and also played soccer over there as a multi-sport athlete, and post-university another sport would get added, as in 2006 he would naturally look to go the professional wrestling route. Much like his family, as himself and his brother Mike DiBiase would start training under the Harley Race Wrestling Academy, as the DiBiase brothers would make their wrestling debuts in the summer of that same year. And after less than a year of wrestling experience, where both of them mostly worked for Harley Race's promotion World League Wrestling, Ted DiBiase was brought in to do a Japanese tour with Pro Wrestling Noah. Very valuable experience so early in his career. And he worked with many big names whilst in Noah, such as Bryan Danielson and Kenta, Misawa, Marufuji, and even teamed up with Eddie Edwards and D'Lo Brown at one point. Just to name a few, as I said, this is super valuable experience to be getting so early in your career, and he was of course signed to the WWE in July of 2007 and would report to Florida Championship Wrestling, aka FCW. He would become a member of the Next Generation Hart Foundation stable along with David Hart Smith, Tyson Kidd, Natalia, and Teddy Hart of all people. I don't know why he was in a Hart family stable, but he would leave quickly and then start teaming with Heath Slater, as well as being accompanied by Maurice as his valet, and at the end of the year he would win the FCW Southern Heavyweight title. However, he would relinquish the belt soon after due to injuries. And throughout 2008, his FCW appearances were more sporadic, with DiBiase now working house shows and dark matches for the main roster simultaneously, as WWE had much greater plans in mind for him. As after months of house shows and dark matches, Ted DiBiase Jr. would get the official call-up with a match scheduled at Night of Champions 2008, challenging Cody Rhodes and Hardcore Holly for the tag titles, with a mystery partner on Ted's side, which would of course end up being Cody Rhodes, who turned on Hardcore Holly, and himself and DiBiase Jr. would bully Holly in this match to win the tag titles. And so just like that, in his WWE debut, Ted DiBiase Jr. had just won the World Tag Team Championships alongside Cody Rhodes. Obviously a very nice start to life. Together, Ted DiBiase Jr. and Cody Rhodes, who of course was also a second generation wrestler, the son of Dusty Rhodes, would form The Legacy. And I gotta say, I've got a lot of nostalgia for Cody Rhodes and Ted DiBiase Jr. as a tag team. I loved their theme song, I remember them in all of the games, and I thought they were a pretty damn solid tag team on TV as well. They had 2 tag belt reigns this year, as they would actually lose the belts after a month to Cena and Batista, but they won them back a week later before dropping them 2.5 months later to CM Punk and Kofi Kingston. Now that is an epic tag team. They also got into a storyline where they were trying to impress Randy Orton to join them, and they even recruited Manu to sweeten the deal, the greatest legacy member of all time. And also Sim Snuka was a member for a week, but I bet nobody even remembers that, as Randy Orton would indeed end up joining the crew, becoming the eventual leader and kicking out Manu and Sim Snuka, getting rid of the dead wood to officially make the legacy trio of Randy Orton, Cody Rhodes, and Ted DiBiase Jr. And man, what a great trio, what a great stable these guys were. They were a great heel act, and throughout 2009 they had many high profile feuds. Of course, Randy Orton was a multi-time world champion this year and won the Royal Rumble with their help, so they accompanied him and were a part of many high profile feuds that he was doing over the world title. I also very fondly remember Legacy's tag matches against DX, I thought those were super fun at the time. In 2010 though, the cracks started to show and the group would indeed split up after months of tension and inadvertently costing matches, and Randy Orton just getting angrier and angrier at these two useless jobbers. Randy Orton dumped them both to end the stable, which would culminate in a triple threat match at WrestleMania 26 by all three of them. Of course, that was won by Randy Orton. And unfortunately for Ted DiBiase Jr. from here, he wouldn't really do that much, especially in comparison to the other two Legacy members. Randy Orton is of course Randy Orton. He would go on to still be a main eventer after Legacy was done, win multiple world titles, and is still a world title contender to this day, a certified Hall of Famer and one of the best of all time. And Cody Rhodes would begin his ascension as a single star post Legacy as well, with the dashing Cody Rhodes run and then the white strap IC title run, the stuff with Goldust as well, which of course led to him leaving the company and reinventing himself to now where he's back in the WWE once again, of course, and is literally the top star in the entire company. Just a crazy trajectory. Ted DiBiase Jr. on the other hand though, well, you know, he had the DiBiase posse. You know, that's the levels, that's the comparison here. Yeah, Ted DiBiase Jr. really didn't have that much going on for him post-Legacy, and it's not to say that WWE didn't try. They tried to recapture the magic of his dad by giving DiBiase Jr. the $1 Million Championship. They even brought back Virgil, which didn't really achieve anything or make him booed more as a heel, and they even had Maurice as his valet like they did in FCW and his on-screen girlfriend, and I guess they were a good heel pairing, but Maurice definitely overshadowed him. But just none of it worked at all, and the only thing I can really remember that DiBiase did post-Legacy was that babyface run circa 2012-2013 where he had the DiBiase posse and he was hosting like tailgate parties before the shows and stuff. That also never really went anywhere, and he was still very much a jobber. And on August 26, 2013, DiBiase announced that due to suffering anxiety and depression that he wouldn't be renewing his WWE contract and that he would be gone from the company, and that would end his WWE career as he would quietly depart from the company with not really much to show for it post-Legacy run. And he would wrap his wrestling career up with another 3 matches in 2013 on the independent scene and then another 2 in 2016 and 2017 respectively, before calling it a day and letting his wrestling career fizzle away. And that would be the last anyone heard of Ted DiBiase Jr. for a long while, until somehow, some way, he found his name in the headlines once again. As around the 2020 to 2022 time, major reports were coming out about a major welfare scandal going down in the USA, as the Mississippi Welfare Fund scandal would rock the nation as one of the largest public corruption cases in Mississippi's history. Let me explain. At its core, the scandal involved the diversion of tens of $millions from federal anti-poverty programs into the hands of several high-profile individuals through fraudulent means, as multiple individuals of the DiBiase family were implicated, including Ted Sr., Brett DiBiase, and of course, Ted Jr. As the scheme actually unfolded years prior between 2017 and 2019, as funds that were intended for low-income families were redirected through fraudulent non-profits and intermediaries to these high-profile individuals. As prosecutors say that large payments to non-profit operators were approved, who then would issue sham contracts to various individuals and entities. And by 2020, audits and investigations exposed what authorities described as widespread widespread fraud, waste, and abuse, with civil lawsuits following in 2022 as they sought to recover tens of millions of dollars from dozens of defendants in this case, of course including the DiBiase family. And that was all within the civil court system at first, but it would enter criminal territory and it would escalate for one Ted DiBiase Jr. as a criminal case against him escalated in April 2023. As the US Department of Justice indicted him on multiple counts of conspiracy, wire fraud, theft of federal funds, and money laundering. It was alleged that companies he controlled received over $3 million in welfare, making him one of the alleged highest receiving individuals in this case. And unlike his other co-defendants who all pleaded guilty, DiBiase Jr. maintained his innocence and chose to go to trial, as now this case centers completely around him in what can kind of be looked at as a Streisand effect. As the federal trial of Ted DiBiase Jr. began in January 2026, marking the first full criminal trial tied to the scandal, as testimonies throughout February and March 2026 painted a very detailed picture of how the money flowed, as many key witnesses, all of whom had already pleaded guilty, testified that contracts were issued to DiBiase despite little or no work being completed, with one witness claiming he delivered at best one list and nothing else in exchange for millions. Financial evidence was brought before the court as an FBI forensic accountant testified that approximately $2.9 million in welfare funds were transferred into DiBiase-controlled companies between 2017 and 2019. And it was further alleged that this money funded things such as a luxury home and a boat for himself. As DiBiase's defense would take the stand, and they argued that he believed the contracts were legitimate, and they also challenged the credibility of the cooperating witnesses, emphasizing the fact that since many had already pleaded guilty, they were testifying to reduce their own sentences. As this trial is still ongoing now, and even with various delays, it looks to be coming to a conclusion very soon. As it stands, the case is in the hands of the jury following the denials of motions to dismiss, so we await the verdict. And man, what a crazy whirlwind of events, just the most random names of all time to hear involved in such a large case like this. Like, of all people to be at the helm of one of the biggest fraud cases in recent history in America, it's some random WWE jobber who retired from wrestling like a decade ago and hasn't been relevant for that long. Like, what? Pause. So yeah, the craziest thing happened just an hour or two after recording this video. Can you take a guess what happened? Ladies and gentlemen, the verdict in the Ted DiBiase Jr. case is in, and Ted DiBiase Jr. has been found not guilty. That's right, despite the evidence, despite all the people testifying against him and all the witnesses, he has been found not guilty and acquitted of all 13 charges. The federal case that has lasted years is now over, and now I'm sat here speculating if Ted DiBiase Jr. could appear for WWE. I mean, Randy Orton and Cody Rhodes are kind of feuding right now. Hey, maybe make it a triple threat. Why the hell not? Of course, I'm just kidding. Do not actually do that, Triple H. But yeah, just my luck that the verdict, of course, comes out an hour after I record the video. He has been acquitted and found guilty, like I said, but regardless, I think everything I've said about him and his WWE career still rings true and still remains true. But yeah, crazy scenes. And yeah, it's just crazy to look at the trajectory of his career compared to the other members of Legacy. Like I said, Randy Orton is one of the top stars in WWE history, and Cody Rhodes, now at this point you could probably say the same thing too with everything he's done. It's been 18 years since the Legacy trio formed, and WrestleMania is next month, and 18 years later, Randy Orton and Cody Rhodes are about to main event that WrestleMania for a world title, whilst Ted DiBiase Jr. sits in the center of one of the most significant welfare fraud prosecutions in recent US history, with a verdict coming at any second now. As I said, man, Ted DiBiase Jr.'s WWE career really amounted to nothing outside of Legacy, and because of that, his legacy is now this court case and will be the main thing associated with him and the DiBiase family forever. Kevin Kiley Jr. was signed to a developmental WWE deal in the year of 2007 as he was reported to Florida Championship Wrestling, aka FCW. Before WWE, he was a standout football athlete playing as a linebacker at Boston College, as he first debuted in October of that year under his real name, as his early career in FCW more or less just saw him as a name on the roster, as he worked with other names on the roster like Natty Neidhart, TJ Wilson, Sean Spears, Jake Hager, Trent Beretta, Sheamus O'Shaughnessy, Drew McIntyre, and the main man himself, Bam Neely. In September of 2008 though, he would go through a gimmick change, now going by the name of Carson Oakley, but this was short-lived as just a couple of months later, he was rebranded once again. Now known as Alex Riley, as this is the name that he was obviously known as for the rest of his wrestling career, and probably what you remember him by. And the new jock character that he had taken on was perfectly fitting for him, as in 2010 he would win the Florida Heavyweight title to really cement his spot as a top prospect in the WWE. And it wasn't too long before the main roster creative team came calling, as you see in that year in 2010, WWE had scrapped the WWE ECW brand and replaced it with the original form of NXT, a competition game show, reality show-esque show featuring 8 new rookies and faces being coached by 8 WWE main roster stars. Season 1 featured names like Daniel Bryan, David Otunga, Skip Sheffield, Darren Young, Justin Gabriel, Michael Tarver, and was won by Wade Barrett. They all went and formed the Nexus afterwards obviously, but that's another story for another time, and as a concept I'd say that NXT Season 1, for a gimmicky C show, did its job. I thought it was decent fun and was a decent success. It's really around the Divas season and the never ending season where it starts to get shaky for this show, but once again, that's another story for another time. But yeah, after Season 1 wrapped up in the summer of 2010, it was straight into Season 2, and our man Alex Riley was called up for it, with The Miz being his pro. The other names on this season were Titus O'Neil, Lucky Cannon, Percy Watson, Eli Cottonwood, Husky Harris aka Bray Wyatt, Michael McGillicuddy aka Curtis Axel, and Cavall aka Low Key. And of all the competitors of this season, Alex Riley definitely had the best character work of the show and of all of the cast. He had the most advanced and established character, mainly because, well, he was the only one that had a character. A-Ride did a good job as a heel on this show. He picked up a winning record, he was safe in the eliminations every week, and his pairing with The Miz definitely had some legs on it. He would make it to the final week and the final 3, but third place is where he would finish, with Cavall winning the season despite jobbing and losing every single one of his matches. This is because, of course, this is a fan vote, and the internet fans are very obviously gonna vote for Low Key, who didn't really need to be here anyway. But even without the win, Alex Riley would be main roster bound, as he was properly called up to the main roster and he would start appearing regularly on the Raw brand alongside The Miz as his protege. Definitely not a bad spot to be in so fresh on the main roster, as this would see him involved in many big angles and many big matches, and when The Miz cashed in his money in the bank on Randy Orton on the November 22nd Raw to win the WWE Championship, the levels got upped even further. As now Alex Riley wasn't just working pay-per-view main events, but he was working world title programs and working with names like John Cena and Randy Orton on the regular. Given the spot that many other NXT rookies were in at this time, this was definitely a very good spot for Alex Riley to be in, and going into 2011 he entered his first Royal Rumble match, being the 40-man one, and WWE had big plans for him in this match, as he was set to be in the final 4, and he was apparently also supposed to eliminate John Cena, before he was accidentally eliminated and dumped out way earlier than he was supposed to be in a total botched elimination. He literally just fell out and slipped out of the ring. Yikes. But regardless, like I said, for a guy less than a year into his main roster run, he was in a very good spot. And with The Miz as WWE Champion still, this meant that Alex Riley had heavy involvement in the main event match and angle of that year's WrestleMania, as The Miz with Alex Riley by his side would face off with John Cena for the WWE Championship, retaining his belt in one of the worst main events on one of the worst WrestleManias ever. And though The Miz did retain his belt over John Cena here following involvement from The Rock, obviously to build up to next year's WrestleMania event, he would lose the belt at Extreme Rules to John Cena the following month, as tensions would really start growing between the pair of The Miz and Alex Riley, with them building for weeks, and when Alex Riley wasn't able to help The Miz regain his belt at Over the Limit, The Miz would totally crash out on Alex Riley, which would lead to Alex Riley retaliating instantly and attacking The Miz back after weeks of torment from his mentor, and he would instantly turn babyface. And out of nowhere, just like that, WWE had just created a huge babyface in Alex Riley, as anyone that's going to stand up to The Miz at this time is bound to get cheered by the fans. As Alex Riley and The Miz would blow off their feud with a match at Capital Punishment, with Alex Riley getting the win in his singles pay-per-view debut in what was a huge moment for him, and it really felt as though WWE may be all in with Alex Riley right now, as from here the reactions for Alex Riley as a babyface would continue to stay strong and consistent. He was a weekly fixture of television on Raw every single week and was casually involved in main event angles and main event matches of TV, teaming with the likes of John Cena and Rey Mysterio as one of the top babyfaces of the brand. How did this happen? And in the late summer, he would get involved in the US title scene and even challenge for the belt at Night of Champions 2011, but after this, it was kind of it for main roster Alex Riley. As suddenly after this, Alex Riley just got instantly demoted to a jobber position and jobber status, as he found a regular home in Superstars instead of Raw, and if he was appearing on one of the main shows, it was just to job out or be a face in a battle royal. As going into 2012, he was the first person eliminated from the Royal Rumble and was now a regular of NXT once again, this being the never-ending season of NXT, which never crowned a winner of the show, which was literal career limbo. And well, this may have had something to do with John Cena! As supposedly John Cena and Alex Riley had major heat with each other backstage in WWE, as Arn Anderson, who was a producer at this time, recalls John Cena giving A-Right advice and Alex Riley being less than thrilled and enthused with it, which instantly got back to the boys in the locker room and in turn the office, as his booking would suffer because of it. This was a story that made the rounds for years but was never really confirmed until Alex Riley was asked about this on Chris Van Vliet and acknowledged that the two did indeed not like each other and it probably did impact his career.
It just happened. I just happened to be in a situation, I think, where right from the start, it was just, he didn't like me. I just don't think he had I just don't think he did. And I tried to change that. You know what I mean? I tried to change that the best I could. I worked very hard and try to do the best I could to grow and learn, and fit in the way that, a wrestler fits in, and he wanted me to fit in. And it just kind of got to the point a little bit with, even some of the other guys would kind of be like, what's up with that? And I'm like, I don't know.
And yeah, as a result, 2012 was just a super quiet year for Alex Riley, as he jobbed and wrestled mainly on the throwaway shows, with his appearances becoming more occasional as time went on, and his wrestling career became so stagnant that he would transition into a broadcaster/commentary role. This wasn't unheard of, as other wrestlers like David Otunga or Byron Saxton and Percy Watson had all done this, all names from game show NXT, funnily enough. That show really did wonders, as he transitioned into this role full time and was just straight up not wrestling at all, with 2014 being a year where he didn't have a single match on TV, as he only wrestled on a few live events in between all of his commentary that he was doing for the WWE, and it was very clear that he wanted to wrestle and didn't want to do this. And in late 2014, early 2015, he would get a Twitter campaign started with #FreeRiley, as he would try to get management's attention to be able to wrestle again. And surprisingly, this actually worked, as on NXT, the new rebranded version, where Alex Riley was doing commentary, he got into a storyline that saw him getting into it with Kevin Owens that led to him making his return as an in-ring competitor. He got beat pretty dominantly in 2 matches by Kevin Owens, but it was a cool storyline and he was getting strong reactions as a babyface once again, now as a member of the NXT roster. So maybe Alex Riley now had a new lease of life once again. He even got to work the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal that year, and hey, someone even had a sign for him on the Raw after WrestleMania, how nice. But unfortunately, not too long after, Riley had to get knee surgery, and when he came back nearly a year later, he turned heel quickly, and this went absolutely nowhere as he would just begin losing matches and was reduced back to a jobber again with no real direction. And he was released from the WWE in May of 2016, just a few months after his return, so his NXT run ended up being a total bust, and the hashtag Free Riley and the hashtag Push Rage campaigns ended up being total failures. So yeah, now out of the company, Alex Riley would go inactive in the world of wrestling as he really did nothing following his WWE release for the next few years. He did do a couple of acting gigs. He did appear in an episode of The Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling, aka Glow, the Netflix series you might remember. And he did a couple of small-time film roles as well, but in 2021 to 2022 time, he would start taking interviews and doing appearances again, as he started teasing a return to wrestling. And sure enough, Alex Riley would make his long-awaited pro wrestling return after 6 years at the Creator Pro 8th of December 2022 Christmas show, under his real name of Kevin Kiley once again, coming out to his Say It To My Face theme. He teamed with Tyrus to defeat Dante Drago and Jack Tomlinson, and this is all the footage that's out there for this. His next match though, which does have footage for it, took place for Billy Corgan's NWA though, as we know that the NWA at this time used to love signing former WWE jobbers, and Kevin Kiley was a perfect name to do this with, as he would make his NWA debut at NWA Nuff Said on the 11th of February 2023. This was the Tyrus themed pay-per-view if you don't remember, by the way. Yeah, dark times for this company. As it's EC3 up against Kevin Kiley in a t-shirt, he looks like a dude they literally found out in the town. As EC3 welcomes Kiley to the NWA to start things off, and it starts off slow as they go back and forth with Kiley and EC3 showing off their fundamentals. Kiley shakes off the cobwebs with some clotheslines as he takes it to EC3, but EC3 comes back, launching him in the corner and takes over control from Kiley over there. They go into rest holds for a while as EC3 is still in control and giving speeches to Kev. Kiley makes his comeback though, ending with a spine buster as EC3 rolls out of the ring, and Kiley is feeling himself now. He rips his shirt off, he goes for the dive, and oh my god, he's dead.
He came down hard, crashed and burned, got caught on the top.
Oh, shit! Woo! That man is fucked. Oh, no!
Put it back on!
Oh, my God!
He missed completely.
Yeah, I'd get an ambulance.
So yeah, Kiley goes for a dive over the corner to the outside. He completely eats shit. It looked horrible and painful, and EC3 kinda had to save the situation a bit, as I imagine he was meant to be taken out by that, but Kiley was nowhere near him. As EC3 in character just starts running him down and questioning why the hell did you do that? I mean, he's not wrong. EC3 then rolls him back into the ring and taps him out with the purpose off of that That's right, they used the failed dive for the finish. And honestly, I'll say to EC3 that he did well to turn that situation into a story beat for the match, but man, what a disaster, as nothing really happened in this match of note other than that big botch, a dive that he really had no business even attempting. Kylie looks rusty out there, his offense didn't look too great, and then of course there's that whole chestnut of him nearly being killed. This was the only NWA match that Alex Riley would do. I believe he was interviewed on NWA Power a few weeks after this as his only other NWA appearance, and that was it for A-Rai in the NWA. Surprisingly though, this match didn't hurt Kylie or leave him out of action for any extended amount of time, as just 8 days later he would wrestle at a Creator Pro show once again against a man named Jay George, and there is footage of this match. Just warning, it's quite choppy and freezes at times, but this is all I could find, as Kevin Kylie is once again wearing regular clothes, and Max Caster and whoever else is on commentary even mention this and even talk about his recent botch. Oh god. This match starts off with some back and forth and some gamesmanship from Jay George as they do your fundamentals once again, and Kevin signals he's gonna go for the dive again, but it's stopped by Jay George's goons. That is funny, he acknowledged it though, I'll give him that. Jay George takes control over here though as he beats down Kylie and is healing it up, but Kylie comes back with a back body drop. He continues the comeback, ending with a spine buster for a near fall, as the ref is then distracted by Jay George's props and he goes for the throat and then hits a skull crushing finale for a near fall himself, as Kylie then hits the Riley elevation DDT for the win over Jay George. It was cool to see his finisher once again, as this was standard indie wrestling action right here, and definitely a better showing than the NWA for sure. But yeah, the ring rust is so apparent in these two matches that we watched. And after that, according to Cage Match, he only wrestled once more as he defeated a man by the name of Bobby Fonta on the 3rd of March at a Florida indie, and there is no footage for this one out there. And yeah, that seems to be it for the wrestling career of Kevin Kylie, as his 2022 comeback was a failure as well, and really didn't go well, with him nearly bloody dying in a match against EC3 on a Tyrus themed show for Billy Corgan's NWA. Does it get any more cursed than that? As based on Kevin Kylie's Instagram now, it looks like he's a stoner nowadays with his Kevin420 postings and frequent videos of this one frog plushie. His wrestling career seems to be done, and it's very interesting because there were so many attempts at getting a push in his wrestling career going, whether it was his initial FCW push or the initial babyface run after breaking it up with The Miz, or that NXT return that he managed to get some hype going for, or that return to wrestling in 2022. There was always an attempt to make Alex Riley some sort of wrestling star, but it never went to plan. I remember liking Alex Riley as a babyface when I was a kid and always wondering what happened to him and why his push suddenly stopped, and it made a lot of sense finding out years later that he had heat with John Cena. And if that heat with John Cena never existed and that altercation never took place, then who knows where Alex Riley's wrestling career would even be. For all we know, he might even still be in the WWE. The guy is only 44 years old. He retired from wrestling at a fairly young age. But regardless, Alex Riley will remain a major what if, as we'll never know what would have happened in his WWE career had he not got into beef with John Cena. Katarina Waters is a German-born English-American former pro wrestler who made her debut in the year 2000. She trained at the same school Paul Burchill did, the Frontier Wrestling Alliance aka the FWA, and spent the next few years working matches on the Brit-Res scene and for the FWA's shows. And in 2006 she would announce on an FWA show that she had been scouted by WWE and would be relocating to the States to train under OVW's roof, as she would begin working under the ring name of Katie Lee, and Katie's OVW run is definitely interesting to read about. She feuded with names like ODB, Serena Deeb, Alicia Fox, Natalia, Maurice, and Beth Phoenix, with herself and Beth Phoenix having an acclaimed ladder match for the women's title, which was more than anything the WWE main roster women were doing. Katie was a two-time OVW Women's Champion during her OVW run, with her second reign coming at the start of 2008. However, she dropped the belt a week later as WWE looked to call her up to the main roster. And so of course they did call her up alongside her brand new brother and love interest Paul, and in terms of how her main roster run went compared to Paul's, she really was just the female equivalent of Paul Burchill, as she was quickly established as a jobber in the women's division, and when she went to ECW it wasn't much better, as though she was picking up a little more wins than usual now, she was hardly ever actually wrestling, as her in-ring appearances became secondary to being a valet for Paul Burchill, as whenever she was appearing on WWE TV it was to accompany Paul Burchill rather than to wrestle herself. And in the entirety of 2009 she only had 3 matches on ECW TV, and though she would stick around on Raw after a bit when ECW shut down, unlike Paul, she was indeed released as well, leaving on the 22nd of April 2010, thus ending a just over 5-year stint with the WWE, where much of it was spent as a jobber and the top moments came in OVW. But Katie Lee was not done with wrestling by any means, as on the 15th of October 2010 she was signed to TNA Wrestling and would start wrestling under the name of Winter, as she would have a very interesting TNA TV debut, as she would first appear on the October 21st 2010 Impact, as she appeared in a mirror that Angelina Love was looking at, claiming to be a fan of Angelina Love, but only Angelina could see her, and everyone else watching at home and watching the show, but just not the TNA roster. For some reason they couldn't see her, only Angelina and the fans could. And after a few weeks of exclusively appearing in mirrors and getting into Angelina's head, she would make her first, I guess, actual appearance as a real person and would be acknowledged by the rest of the TNA roster. And she would infiltrate her way into the Beautiful People, which of course Angelina Love was a part of, as on the December 23rd 2010 episode of Impact, Angelina and Velvet Sky were set to challenge for the Knockouts tag belts. But when Velvet Sky was attacked and injured by Sarita, she was replaced by, of course, Winter, and Winter and Angelina Love would win the Knockouts tag belt. So instantly, more success than in WWE. And the storyline very quickly devolved into something very weird, as what started off as a storyline where Winter was seemingly just trying to drive a wedge between the Beautiful People turned into her mind-controlling Angelina Love, who was just a mindless zombie being controlled by Winter. Yes, I'm being for real. As Angelina Love was, quote, under her spell, and Winter would give Angelina Love medicine and use it to control her. Again, I'm being totally serious here. As this of course started a feud with Winter and Angelina against Velvet, which actually ended up with Velvet defeating them in a handicap match, because yeah, that's gonna make them look strong, isn't it? However, despite this loss, Winter would begin a feud with the Knockouts champion Mickie James and actually win the title from her at 2011's Hardcore Justice event, winning some singles gold in TNA. She did lose the belt though after 18 days back to Mickie James, before winning it back at No Surrender, and then losing it at Bound for Glory in a 4-way to Velvet Sky because, you know, Hulk Hogan TNA booking. And Winter would float around on TV for a bit, but then seemingly TNA just got bored of both her and Angelina Love as they disappeared as a tag team, and both were released in 2012, because once again, Hogan's TNA booking, I guess. But yeah, a super weird run for Winter in TNA, where she was presented as a top knockout, got multiple Knockouts title reigns and a Knockouts tag title reign, but the reigns were not good and were overshadowed by the weird storyline that she was in the very center of. But following the TNA release, Katarina Waters remained active in wrestling for over 10 years, as after this she would spend the next decade working for various companies in various countries under various names. She even did a WCPW appearance and made a brief TNA return in 2018, but her wrestling career would come to an end in 2019 as she would retire from the business. And ultimately, Katarina Waters / Katie Lee / Winters is someone who goes down as someone who, if used seriously, we really have no idea what she could have done, as both WWE and TNA refuse to use her seriously whatsoever, and her best work surprisingly comes from her OVW run. as Kairi Hosako was born on September 23rd, 1988 in Japan, and before becoming a pro wrestler she had great experience in multiple sports including yachting specifically, and also she had great experience in theatre and acting, and those two things combined, theatre and sports, when they are combined, are two things that go hand in hand with professional wrestling of course, as Kairi's love for these two things would lead to her finding her love for professional wrestling, and in 2011 Kairi would begin training under Stardom to become a professional wrestler. What is Stardom, you may be asking? Well, they are the leading Joshi wrestling promotion based in Japan. What's Joshi, you ask? Well, Joshi is a Japanese term referring to women or girls, so in short, Stardom is the leading all-female wrestling promotion in Japan, and to be honest, probably the entire world too. She officially passed her pro test at the end of that year, officially becoming a professional wrestler, and she would begin working Stardom under the name of Kairi Hojo. And using her background in yachting, she would be dubbed the Pirate Princess, and this character and look and entire aesthetic would stick around for pretty much her entire wrestling career, as Kairi would win her first title in Stardom in 2013, winning the Goddess of Stardom tag titles alongside Natsumi Shozuki, though their reign only lasted a month. That same year though, she won the vacant Artist of Stardom Championship, which is a trios belt, and the next year regained the Goddess belt, getting an 8-month reign with the title this time. And to top it all off, in the next year, in March of 2015, she would win the top prize in Stardom, winning the world title by defeating Io Shirai to win it. She would lose the belt to Miko Satomura in June of that year, and pretty much in just a few years, Kairi had achieved really all there was to do in Stardom, winning every single belt. She would also do some work in America for the first time, with her one-match run in Lucha Underground being very memorable to a lot of people, as she faced and was defeated by Penta in a crazy match. And by 2016, she was getting heavy interest from the WWE, reportedly being offered a contract in October. And after much deliberation and a little concern over Kairi's concussion history, Kairi would officially sign her WWE contract and join the company in March 2017 on a 3-year deal. And 2017 really was the perfect time for a female wrestler of Kairi's caliber to sign for the WWE, as 2017 this year would see the Mae Young Classic take place for the first time. The Mae Young Classic, if you don't know somehow, was of course the all-women's tournament that WWE held that featured a combination of their up-and-coming female stars and unsigned female indie talent. And Kairi, now under the brand new ring name of Kairi Sane, would go on an incredible run in this tournament, defeating some very familiar faces, as she defeated Tessa Blanchard, Bianca Belair, Dakota Kai and Toni Storm in that order to advance to the finals of the 2017 Mae Young Classic, and in the final she was met with Shayna Baszler. And once again, Kairi Sane would win as she defeated Shayna Baszler, making history as the inaugural Mae Young Classic winner, a huge moment so early for her in her WWE tenure. And with that tournament victory, she earned herself a shot at the vacant NXT Women's title, as this would be in the form of a 4-way match at TakeOver War Games 2017, with Ember Moon coming out on top. From there though, Kairi Sane would assimilate into the NXT brand and start working on TV regularly, being presented as one of the top women's stars as she slowly but surely worked her way towards yet another shot at the NXT Women's title, as her next chance at the NXT Women's belt wouldn't come until the summer of the next year, as at NXT TakeOver Brooklyn 2018 she would go for the belt once again, now being held by old foe and former Mae Young finalist opponent Shayna Baszler. As in a very good match, Kairi would dethrone Shayna once again to win the NXT Women's title, and now she was at the very tippity top of the division with a title win and a big tournament win under her name after just a year. However, Kairi's actual reign with the NXT Women's title wasn't all sunshines and rainbows. In fact, it's probably one of the worst NXT Women's title reigns in history, unfortunately, as she held the belt for only 71 days in total without a successful defense under her name, and she lost it right back to Shayna Baszler. Kairi Sane would try numerous times to regain the belt but was just not successful in any of her efforts, with her final attempt coming on the 17th of April 2019 episode of NXT, where as per stipulation, if she lost the match, she would never be able to challenge for the belt again, and she did indeed lose this match and was not allowed to challenge for the belt again, but this stipulation was done in order to write her off NXT, as a main roster call-up was imminent and she would be called up to the SmackDown brand post-WrestleMania in 2019. And it's here and around this time where herself and Asuka would form the Kabuki Warriors tag team, and with Paige as their manager, at first before they turned on her, they would take over the women's tag division, as they first won the women's tag belts at Hell in a Cell 2019, winning them off of Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross, and they would defend the belts numerous times, holding them for over 6 months, including the infamously very bad match against Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair at TLC in the main event in a TLC match, where Kairi unfortunately got concussed following getting an iPad chucked at her head. And Kairi Sane would return to action a couple of months later, and the Kabuki Warriors eventually lost the titles at the COVID WrestleMania back to Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross, and shortly after this, Kairi would get injured again, this time at the hands of Nia Jax, who seemed to be injuring a lot of people at this time. But when Kairi Sane did come back, herself and the now Raw Women's Champion Asuka would get themselves into a feud with Sasha Banks and Bayley, with Bayley being the SmackDown Women's Champion at this time and Bayley and Sasha Banks being the women's tag belt holders at this time, so all the women's belts were involved in this feud. For Kairi though herself, her involvement in this feud was short-lived, as after getting attacked brutally backstage by Bayley on the July 27th Raw, it was announced by Kairi Sane herself that she would actually be departing WWE, and that was her last appearance. This was a big out of nowhere announcement, a very sad announcement to see Kairi Sane leaving WWE so abruptly and so early on, but she said she was doing it so she can move back to Japan with her husband, which of course is totally fair. Not really up to any of us to judge that, and sure enough, Kairi Sane would disappear from WWE just like that, and she remained under contract for another year as she worked as an ambassador for the company, but her contract would officially expire in December of 2021. And her wrestling career seemed all but done until just 2 months later when she made her big return back to stardom. And this was a really great time for Kairi Sane to make her return back to the Joshi wrestling scene, as the new IWGP Women's Championship just got introduced that year. And this belt would give the historic opportunity for Joshis to work New Japan Pro Wrestling shows for the first ever time, as at the end of 2022 at New Japan's historic X Over event, Kairi would main event the show against Mayu Iwatani in the finals to crown the first IWGP Women's Champion, and Kairi would make history once again with another inaugural tournament win, winning the whole damn thing and becoming the IWGP Women's Champion as the first ever champion. Once again though, just like her first NXT Women's title reign, this reign was not all sunshines and rainbows, and in fact was quite a nothing title reign once again, as this reign with the IWGP Women's title belt only lasted 90 days with only one successful title defense before losing it to Mercedes Moné. And shortly after this, Kairi would become a free agent, and the door was now open for her to return to WWE again, which she would indeed do in late 2023 as she returned at Crown Jewel and instantly joined the Damage Control stable. And this really was a great spot for Kairi Sane to be in at this point of her wrestling career, and this was probably the best point of her WWE run as a whole, as Damage Control were a dominant act. They were a regular fixture on TV, they were constantly presented as looking very strong, and they won pretty much every women's belt that they could win, both singles and tag. With Kairi Sane and Asuka, the Kabuki Warriors reuniting as a duo once again and winning the women's tag belts once again as well. However, when they did lose the belts and the group turned face shortly soon after, things kind of started to go downhill, As first of all, Kairi Sane got injured once again in January of 2025 as she had to leave to get surgery on her thumb, and in the time she was absent, Damage Control would quietly disband as Dakota Kai, one of the members, was shockingly released from WWE. And Kairi Sane would make her WWE return on May 19th, 2025, see no evil reference, and at this point now, she was a total side character to Io Sky and Asuka, whom WWE seemed far more interested in giving focus to. And sure, herself and Asuka did win the women's tag belts once again for a third reign, but these only lasted 56 days and was very much a here damn reign. And after that, it was truly all downhill once again as Io and Asuka started feuding with each other, with tensions boiling between the two of them, and Kairi at this point just a total side character and non-factor in this feud. As on the Raw after WrestleMania 42, Kairi Sane would wrestle her final and last WWE match as she teamed with Asuka in a losing effort to Io Sky and Rhea Ripley, and just 4 days later, Kairi Sane was shockingly released from the WWE alongside numerous others. And WWE fans were pissed and very angry about Kairi Sane being released from the WWE, as she really didn't get to play much of an important role in a feud between Io and Asuka, where realistically she should be a focal point of that feud. They should be fighting over her. As out of all the various releases that had happened and the cuts that took place, it seemed as though the WWE universe were most outraged about Kairi Sane's. But despite the backlash and despite the fans letting their voices be heard with the We Want Kairi hashtags and the We Want Kairi chants at shows, it unfortunately led to nothing, and it's most likely that Kairi Sane will not be returning back to WWE. A true shame. And yeah, Kairi's future in wrestling is now unknown. It's unknown whether she's going to continue being a wrestler period, or where she's going to go. What company will she end up at next if she is to continue on wrestling? What is for certain though is that Kairi Sane was not given a fair shake in her WWE run. And it's a strange thing to say maybe, because Kairi Sane, I admit, her run in WWE overall was not bad at all. She had some big matches, she won belts, she was part of the Damage Control stable, she was part of the Kabuki Warriors. However, the one thing that Kairi Sane never got was a fair shake on her own as a singles worker. Unlike the likes of Io Sky and Asuka, Kairi Sane was never given an opportunity to show what she could do on her own on the main roster, with her NXT run being the only time that she was ever actually on her own. Throughout her entire main roster WWE run, in both runs, she was always just a member of a team or a stable, where she was always a side character in that group and never the main focus, and never really got any spotlight on herself. And it's a true shame, because in my opinion, Kairi Sane is just as talented as the likes of Io Sky and Asuka, who, as I said, get a very deserved platform and very deserved pushes, but I feel as though Kairi could have also got that deserved singles push that she never got. But yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see what Kairi Sane does next. Obviously, there's speculation about AEW. Forbidden Door is coming up soon, so maybe that could be a good avenue to have her come into AEW. But obviously, there are always questions about AEW and how they handle their women's division's booking, so would it be a good idea for Kairi Sane to go to AEW? Maybe not. And other than that, I guess the other possibilities are a Stardom return once again, maybe TNA, I couldn't see that happening though, or maybe MLW, there's some Joshis on MLW. Kairi Sane versus Shotzi Blackheart on MLW for the women's belt, I would not say no to that, that sounds pretty exciting. But yeah, it's just a guessing game here. What Kairi Sane actually does next is unknown right now, and we won't find out until those 90 days are up. But as I said once again, I really feel as though Kairi Sane just never got that chance in WWE to shine on her own, and that just sucks to see. She really had so much success so early on with the big Mae Young Classic tournament win and the NXT Women's title win, and that really was the highest heights that she hit as a singles worker. It was never anything above that after this. Born on the 6th of May 1988 in Auckland, New Zealand, it wouldn't be until she was 19 that she became a professional wrestler and began wrestling across her native country and the nearby Australia. She would take on the ring name of just Evie, a very simple name and a name inspired by her favourite Pokemon. Leave in the comments down below what's your favourite evolution, because mine is Umbreon all the way. And she would spend the next few years working the regional circuit in both New Zealand and Australia, and she would work with a few familiar faces such as Jessie McKay and Madison Eagles. And going into the 2010s, we'd really see Evie expand as she started getting booked in the States, more specifically with the all-women's promotions Shimmer and Shine in 2013. As during this first US tour, she worked with familiar names like Mia Yim and Mercedes Martinez, and following that first US tour in 2013, she would then tour Japan for the first time in 2014, further expanding herself and getting more reps in, and by next year, Evie was one of the top stars in the Australia-New Zealand scene and a rising star on the indies, as she was frequently coming into the US to do more work there. This led to her first WWE appearance in October of 2015 in a squash match on NXT, as she was beaten by Nia Jax, and then going into 2016 she would do her first tour of Stardom, which really was a great indicator of just how highly touted she was at this point. And after another year of working between the States and her home territory, Evie would get her biggest opportunity to date, as 2017 would see the first edition of the Mae Young Classic take place in WWE. If you don't recall, the Mae Young Classic was a tournament that WWE held at the time, with this being the very first one. Like I said, it was an all-women's tournament featuring some upcoming names of the women's division in WWE and some unsigned indie talent. And as it turns out, Evie had actually signed a WWE contract just 6 months prior at the end of 2016, and after finishing her indie dates and obligations, she was ready for the Mae Young Classic. And now, under the name of Dakota Kai, she would go on a bit of a run in this tournament, as she would first defeat Kavita Devi and then Rhea Ripley before losing to eventual winner Kairi Sane in the quarterfinals. And a quick note about Dakota Kai's match with Kavita Devi: that match just has like a mad amount of views on YouTube. I swear it's like in the hundreds of millions or near there. And from here, Dakota Kai would continue on in NXT, and she'd spend about the next year or so mostly being a regular on the house show circuit, with her appearances on TV for NXT being more occasional, and usually they were in a jobber match setting, or as a face in a battle royal, or even on NXT UK. But towards the end of 2018 though, Dakota Kai would start to become more of a presence on mainline NXT TV, as she allied with Kairi Sane in her NXT Women's title feud against Shayna Baszler, and maybe some bigger things were coming. However, at seemingly the worst time, bad luck would strike, as Dakota Kai unfortunately suffered an injury during a live event in December, that being a torn ACL, which would keep her out of action for 9 months. However, thankfully upon her return to NXT, she would continue right where she left off, and she would be taken to the next level in her NXT career following a major heel turn. You see, around the time that Dakota Kai came back from injury, so did Tegan Nox around that same time period, and they would start teaming up on TV. And they would ally themselves up with Candice LeRae and Rhea Ripley, who was feuding with Shayna Baszler over the NXT Women's belt, and she had her own crew of heels with a War Games match set between the two groups. However, Dakota Kai ended up getting snubbed from the team, with them picking Mia Yim over her, and this did not sit well with Dakota Kai, who would actually end up in the team after all. As Mia Yim was mysteriously attacked, I wonder by who. I couldn't just think of who this possibly could be, and thus Dakota Kai would then replace Mia Yim in the War Games match and get her rightful spot in the match. However, during the course of the match and during Dakota Kai's entrance, there would be an awesome moment when she turned heel and attacked Tegan Nox inside of the shark cage. It removed them both from the match, leaving it a 2-on-4, which somehow the two still managed to get the win in, but this was genuinely an awesome heel turn and an all-timer NXT moment, this Dakota Kai attack on Tegan Nox. This of course kicked off a feud with herself and Tegan Nox, which Dakota Kai would get the W in, and she also defeated Mia Yim in their big grudge match as well, as you would guess, Dakota Kai was the mystery attacker, who would have thought? And Dakota Kai Kai would spend 2020 near the top of the women's division and the women's scene in NXT, but just couldn't get her claws on the NXT women's title, with her biggest opportunity at the belt being at NXT TakeOver 30 in August of that year, as she failed to beat Io Shirai for the belt in maybe one of the better moments and more opportune times to give her the victory. She was in the winning side of War Games once again that year, but it was when she started teaming with Raquel Gonzalez going into the next year that things would really shake up for her NXT run, as they would enter the Women's Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic, the first ever one, and they would win the tournament, going all the way and winning the whole damn thing to earn a shot at the main roster's Women's Tag Championships. They would, however, lose that match. They were unsuccessful, losing to Shayna Baszler and Nia Jax. However, there was a dusty finish, as Dakota Kai was not the legal person in the match when she was submitted, and as such, the very next week, Dakota Kai and Raquel Gonzalez were awarded the newly formed NXT Women's Tag titles as the first ever champions. So yeah, history being made here as the inaugural champions, the first ever champions in a title lineage for a belt that is gonna last for so long, right? I mean, these belts are gonna be around forever, right? And totally not pointless to introduce. And of course, it was the biggest W of Dakota Kai's career thus far, all to then lose them not even an hour later. Yep, I'm not even kidding. The very same night they were awarded the belt, they dropped them to Ember Moon and Shotzi Blackheart. Literally, why? Like, you couldn't even wait until a takeover to redo this match and have these two finalists in the tournament rematch? Like, why did it need to be the same night the belts were awarded? Not even like an hour later. It was in the middle of the show, not even in the main event. Just a total slap in the face and just totally pointless to do, because why not just have the match be for the belts? Why award them the belts without them earning them in a match to then lose them? Just have the match be for the belts and don't have Dakota Kai and Raquel be awarded them to begin with. So pointless. I digress though. I think the reason this booking took place was because they had big plans for Raquel Gonzalez, who would end up turning face, and the alliance between Raquel and Dakota would explode soon after, with Raquel getting a singles push and she would start going for the NXT Women's title. And when Dakota Kai cost her match against Mandy Rose for the title, it led to a Team Dakota versus Team Raquel War Games match in December 2021. Team Dakota would lose this match, marking her first loss in a Women's War Games match for Dakota Kai, and she was kind of stuck in limbo for a bit after this. That would be until she turned face and reunited with Raquel once again for whatever reason, which would lead to them actually winning their NXT Women's Tag Belts once again at Stand and Deliver the next year. Finally, they were going to get a proper reign with the belts they didn't get to the first time. Just kidding, they lost them on the very next NXT, 3 days later. Man, I'm not even gonna crash out about it. I already have earlier in the video, but yeah, 3 days once again. I don't even know why they did this, because they lost them straight back to the Toxic Attraction, who they won them off of. Just, what is this booking? The next week, Dakota unsuccessfully challenged for the NXT Women's Belt, and that would end up being her last appearance in this first WWE run, as she was released from the WWE on April 29th, 2022. There was already talks that Dakota Kai was intent on not renewing her contract, which was coming up at around that time, so this release wasn't really much of a surprise, but the future was definitely uncertain for Dakota. Many fans speculated she might get an AEW run and become All Elite, but no, it would actually be a WWE return instead, as Triple H took over creative and brought Dakota Kai back in a big way, as she would re-debut now on the main roster at SummerSlam, officially forming the Damage Control stable alongside Bayley and Io Sky, and eventually Kairi Sane and Asuka. This was a great spot for Dakota and herself. She was now part of the top women's heel act in the company, and a group that had so much momentum upon their debut. And herself and Io Sky would enter a tournament for the vacant women's tag belts, which they made it to the finals of and lost to Aaliyah and Raquel. What is Dakota Kai's luck with women's tag titles? And why? Why did Aaliyah and Raquel win these belts? It was such an odd decision at the time. Dakota Kai and Io Sky was the obvious choice, and they literally would win it 9 days later anyway, so again I ask, what is the point and what is this booking? This win would mark the first bit of gold for the Damage Control group, and they would hold the belts for 45 days with one successful title defense before losing them to Alexa Bliss and Asuka and then winning them back again 5 days later. Genuinely, what the fuck is this booking? But finally the curse would be lifted and she would finally get a lengthier reign with the belts at nearly 4 months in this women's tag title reign, but even so there was only one successful title defense in those 4 months before losing them to Becky Lynch and Lita. And this time they wouldn't win them back, which unfortunately would mark the last time Dakota Kai won a title in WWE. Spoilers for later. And this would result in a feud which led to a 6-woman tag match at WrestleMania 39 where Damage Control would lose to Becky Lynch, Lita and Trish Stratus. Damage Control were drafted to the SmackDown brand in 2023, and not too long after, Dakota Kai would unfortunately tear her ACL again, just so unlucky, leaving her out of action for many months. She would appear as a manager for a bit while she wasn't cleared to go in the ring until early 2024 when she did get cleared just in time for Bayley's big crashing and exit from the group. Dakota initially took Bayley's side and exited the stable along with her, but it was a ruse, a swerve all along, and Dakota double-crossed Bayley and rejoined Damage Control. She would compete in Mania that year as the group lost to Bianca Belair, Naomi and Jade Cargill, and the group were drafted back to Raw. They would turn babyface pretty quickly into their Raw run, which would mark maybe a big change for the group and Dakota Kai of course, but unfortunately for Dakota she suffered yet another injury, this time tearing her meniscus. She would return by the end of the year just in time to enter a tournament for the new Women's IC title, and she would make it all the way to the finals set to face Lyra Valkyria for the new Women's Intercontinental belt. And a lot of people wanted to see Dakota win this, and it felt like a really good opportunity to give Dakota Kai the win here in what was maybe a title win she deserved, and she could finally get a proper run with a belt as the first inaugural IC champion, with even Dakota herself on stream just asking for an opportunity.
If I don't win on Monday, we riot. Guys! I've never had like an opportunity as a singles competitor on a PLE. And I'm not talking about NXT, you know what I mean? CW Sober, thank you for the 3 months. I don't know. I'm getting like, you know that feeling where you're just like, give me an opportunity, please, anything. I'm crying. I'm crying because I'm so emotional about this.
However, despite the plea and backing from fans, it just wasn't to be, and Lara would defeat Dakota to win the Women's IC title, and 2 weeks later, it was reported once again that Dakota Kai was injured, having picked up a concussion. And she would make a couple of more appearances on WWE TV, mostly on Main Event upon returning, but on the 2nd of May 2025, Dakota Kai was once again released from the WWE as part of the yearly budget cuts. It truly was a shame, as these last couple of years of her run were just met with such bad luck and some extremely cursed booking. Many fans were obviously unhappy about her being released from WWE, but by this point in her run, she had lasted 3 years in this second run in WWE, and it didn't seem like WWE at any point saw her as anything more than the C side of Damage Control. And Dakota Kai has since returned to the indies, now under the name of Charlie, but she's only had a couple of matches so far, and who knows what the future for Charlie holds. With an AEW appearance or an AEW signing is still absolutely possible, but who knows, it's been about a year now, and it still hasn't happened. I think Dakota Kai had many opportunities in WWE to be taken to the next level, but WWE just refused to do anything substantial with her. She would either make it to the final hurdle before she was booked to lose, or when she finally did get a title reign, they just weren't given anything in those title reigns. Like, the booking of Dakota Kai around the women's tag belts is just some of the most cursed and just absolutely nonsensical booking I've ever seen. I truly can't wrap my head around it. I think there was absolutely an opportunity to make her a big singles heel in NXT, but they opted to do the team with Raquel instead, and she ended up getting a bigger push than Dakota. And yeah, obviously there was bad luck with injuries, but I also can't help but think there were many opportunities for WWE to take Dakota to the next level, and they just refused to do so. As much as I love Lyra Valkyria and she was a great women's IC champion, maybe Dakota Kai should have won that one before dropping it to Lyra once again. So obviously before we get to her WWE run, we have to go back to the very start of her wrestling career, as Zelina Vega had a storied wrestling career long before joining the WWE. As Thea Trinidad began her wrestling career aged 17 in 2010 and would work the independent scene for the next half a decade or so, as well as working for TNA. Yeah, I feel like a lot of people might not know this, but Zelina Vega did have a run in TNA under the name of Rosita. And she was part of the Mexican America stable alongside Sarita, Hernandez, and Anarquia, one of the most interesting TNA stables to look back on and maybe one of the worst. But yeah, Zelina Vega, or Rosita, had a fair bit of success in TNA. She was a former TNA Knockouts Tag Champion, as herself and Sarita won the titles from Winter and Angelina Love at the infamous Victory Road 2011. As herself and Sarita would defend the belts 3 times before losing them in July of that year, and after that she kind of just coasted in TNA as a random member of the Knockouts division, as well as the Mexican America disbanding. And she would depart TNA in 2013, making her run last only 2 years, but she would continue on in the independent scene until 2017, working for promotions across the world. AAA, Ring of Honor, Global Force Wrestling, and a tour in Stardom were all put under Zelina Vega's belt during this time, and she got lots of experience before officially signing for the WWE in 2017. She had actually had a tryout a few years prior and also did some extra work for WWE as a Rosebud like everyone at this time did, but now it was official and she officially reported to the Performance Center. And very quickly Zelina Vega got established in NXT as she became the manager slash valet of Andrade Cien Almas. And this very much became her main role, just being a manager slash valet, as her in-ring career took a back seat. Matter of fact, in her entire NXT run, she only ever actually had one televised NXT match, with other ones coming from live events, and she was mostly just a manager the entire time, like I said. As that match came towards the end of her NXT run in a losing effort to Candice LeRae in 2018, before herself and Andrade were both called up to the main roster and would report to SmackDown. And over on SmackDown, Zelina Vega would become a lot more active as an in-ring competitor, as she was now doing both 50-50 as a manager and a wrestler. And herself and Andrade would kick off life on SmackDown with a feud with Rusev and Lana, leading to a mixed tag team match at SummerSlam that they would pick up the win in. However, very quickly on, it seemed as though WWE didn't know what to do with them or what brand they should be on, as in the Superstar Shakeup in 2019, they were traded to Raw just to show up back on SmackDown just days later. And then before the end of the year in October, during the official draft, they were then drafted back to Raw, so it just seemed as though WWE had no idea where to put them. But things got a little more streamlined and smooth sailing for both of them and for Andrade, as he would win the US title at the end of that year, which would then kick off that generational set of matches that he had with Rey Mysterio over the belt. We all remember that. And going into 2020, Andrade and Zelina Vega would recruit and align themselves with Angel Garza, who was now a new member of their faction and their alliance. And Andrade and Garza were set to challenge for the Street Profits tag titles at WrestleMania. However, that year's Mania of course got moved to the PC because of COVID. And Andrade himself, due to COVID exposure, had to actually miss that Mania and get removed from that match. So Zelina Vega was left managing the random duo of Angel Garza and Austin Theory instead. 2020 may be one of the weirdest years for WWE ever, not just because of the empty arenas and the pandemic, but because of the booking as well. They were throwing anything at the wall at this time. This year as well would see Zelina also have her first pay-per-view singles match, as she would challenge Asuka for the Raw Women's title at the Clash of Champions event, and she of course did lose this match and was unsuccessful in challenging for it, but during the build to this match, herself and Andrade's alliance would officially come to an end, and that's because both herself and Andrade's statuses with WWE were very much up in the air. You see, backstage and behind the scenes, Zelina Vega had garnered a fair bit of heat for herself with WWE management due to the operations of her OnlyFans account. As you see, during this time, WWE were cracking down on wrestlers having third-party accounts on Twitch or YouTube or OF, of course, like I said, and Zelina, like other wrestlers, was told to shut it down, but she refused, as she was apparently making more money from that OF account than she was in her WWE contract, so why would she shut it down? And this would lead to her getting released from her WWE contract on November 13th, 2020, as she tweeted that same day of her firing in support of unions being formed, and the reported reason was of course because she opposed WWE getting control of her accounts on third-party platforms. And Zelina had a lot of support with this. Many people were taking her side and saying that she was unjustly fired and giving her credit for standing her ground. And obviously there was much speculation about where Zelina Vega was going to end up next now that she had been fired from the WWE. Maybe she could go back to TNA and the Mexican America could reform. Sarah Stock, aka Sarita, had just recently became a free agent, so maybe they could reform that team her. Or better yet, maybe she could go to AEW and join the House of Black with her real-life husband, Aleister Black. So much was being speculated, everyone had predictions and fantasy booking, but none of those things happened. As 8 months later, in the summer of 2021, after her WWE release, Zelina Vega came back and returned to the WWE, having made no appearances elsewhere for other wrestling companies. And people were surprised about this, but also not, because it's the wrestling business. Mickie James had just came in for an appearance around this time as well, after the whole bin bag ordeal, and it kind of showed that it's possible for anyone to come back to WWE, and that bridge is never really burnt, unless you did some crazy shit. And Zelina Vega got into the swing of things quickly now as a solo act for the first time in her WWE career, as she first competed in the Women's Money in the Bank for the first time, and then she would enter the first ever Women's Queen's Crown tournament, aka the Queen of the Ring tournament, and Zelina Vega would only go on to win the whole bloody thing, winning the entire tournament and officially becoming Queen Zelina in her biggest WWE win to date. And it only got better for the Queen before the year ended, as Queen Zelina and Carmella would then win the women's tag titles before the year ended, marking Zelina Vega's first belt and title win in WWE. Everything was coming up Zelina. And they would hold these belts for a few months before losing them at Mania 38 in a 4-way women's tag match, with Sasha Banks and Naomi coming out on top. Uh-oh, that is some trouble. Dudes with a time machine, get in now and make sure that title change doesn't happen. And following losing the women's tag title, she would be off TV for a bit due to injury, but when she did make her return, she was completely rebranded once again, as when she did come back, she was now a babyface, the Queen moniker removed as she was just Zelina Vega again, and she would join the newly reformed Latino World Order alongside Rey Mysterio and Legado del Fantasma. And this may have been Zelina Vega's most active year so far, though it wasn't the most successful. She was getting the most TV time she had ever gotten and the most exposure she had ever gotten in her WWE run thus far, as she even earned herself a women's title shot against Rhea Ripley, with the match taking place at Backlash, which, if you remember, took place in her hometown of San Juan, Puerto Rico, in what was a huge moment for Zelina Vega, probably the biggest match of her wrestling career, and she got a major ovation in a moment that meant a lot to her clearly. And the appearances with the LWO would continue on. She was a regular fixture on TV for the end of the year, but the LWO definitely died down a bit following, as they just kind of stuck around for way too long and weren't really doing all that much. They were a glorified jobber group. And going into 2025, Zelina Vega would get drafted away from the LWO to SmackDown, meaning she was officially a singles wrestler once again. And this led to Zelina Vega finding her first bit of singles success in her WWE career, as soon after arriving on the SmackDown brand, she would challenge Chelsea Green for the Women's US title. And yeah, Zelina Vega would come out on top and officially win the Women's US title, being her first and only singles WWE title win, a huge moment for her once again. And yes, so far Zelina Vega's second WWE run had been very successful and night and day between her first one. Zelina looked great with the belt, though she only held it for 63 days and her reign was a bit underwhelming as she only defended the belt once against Chelsea Green, of course, the one she won it off of, before she lost the belt to Julia on a random episode of SmackDown. And let me tell you, that was kind of it for Zelina Vega, as immediately after she would challenge Julia once again for the belt, but she failed to regain it, and after that, her appearances became very sporadic and pretty much all of her momentum was gone and just vanished. As in the end, it kinda seemed like her women's US title reign was just a here damn title reign, if you know what I'm saying. As Zelina Vega treaded in water on SmackDown for the next few months with her future uncertain, but then on the October 10th SmackDown, she would turn back heel once again and align herself with Aleister Black. A move that had been discussed and fantasy booked by fans for years now, and now it was finally coming into fruition, and this felt kind of exciting. It seemed like it had potential, it made sense, but it became obvious fairly quickly that this was only done because there was no plans for either of them, so they just stuck them together. And after a few months of Zelina Vega accompanying Aleister Black to his matches and then losing herself whenever she was wrestling, it was apparent there was nothing planned for them. And the final nail in the coffin for the both of them was probably when Aleister Black was meant to be involved in the Mania build with Randy Orton and Cody Rhodes, but instead got subbed out in favour of Pat McAfee. Zelina Vega and Aleister Black were left off of the Mania card, and most weeks they were left off the SmackDown card too, and their careers were kinda just cooked at this point. And yeah, that brings us to where we are now, as Zelina Vega alongside Aleister Black and about a dozen other WWE talents ended up getting released from the WWE and their contracts on April 24th, 2026 on WWE's typical Black Friday releases. Zelina Vega and Aleister Black being on that list were definitely maybe two of the most shocking people to see on that list of releases, but when I look back at her WWE career the last year or so, it really isn't all that surprising. She was treading in water for a while, it seemed as though WWE had no idea what to do with her, so it doesn't really come as much as a surprise now that I'm looking back. The writing kinda seemed like it was on the wall for a while, but now that leaves us with the question, what is next for Zelina Vega? And to be honest, I don't really know. It is said that she does have a movie role booked already, which good for her, that is awesome to hear, but in terms of her wrestling career, I'm really not sure where she goes. During the 8 months that Zelina Vega was gone from WWE for her first release, she of course didn't appear anywhere else or take any sort of bookings, so there's no real indication or clue where she could go next. Obviously the best option would be AEW outside of WWE, but Malachi Black or Aleister Black seems to have burnt that AEW bridge, and I assume that kind of affects Zelina Vega and means that she most likely wouldn't end up in AEW either. It's definitely going to be interesting to see what both of them do following the expiring of the 90-day no-compete clause. I personally could see Zelina Vega ending up in maybe TNA or MLW or doing some stuff in Japan, in Stardom or Marigold or somewhere like that. Now that I'm saying it, I think her and Malachi Black ending up in MLW is just the ultimate place for them. MLW kind of seems like the place where you go if AEW or TNA or WWE aren't picking you up. You know, you see guys like Matt Riddle and Karrion Kross on that promotion. And yeah, Malachi Black versus Killer Kross for the MLW title and Zelina Vega versus Shotzi Blackheart for the MLW women's title just sound kind of right. They sound like they make sense. So I could see that happening. But as for Zelina Vega's 2 runs in WWE, it is obvious that her second run was way better than the first, as she found much title success in that second one. However, much like her first run, there was a lot of periods during her second run where she was just doing absolutely nothing, and herself and Malachi's partnership really should have been something a lot bigger on WWE TV in my opinion. So under the ring name of Tommy End, he would officially make his debut in 2002, so he's been around in wrestling for a long while, like I said, over 2 decades now, and he wrestled extensively on the European circuit, especially going into the late 2010s when he'd start wrestling more on the Brit Res scene like in Progress, and in Rev Pro and OTT, and WXW in Germany. and he was a standout name in the European wrestling scene during the 2000s and mid-2010s to the point that he was imported to do work elsewhere in Japan and in America, with PWG being a place that really became home for Tommy End, and he became a name that is quite synonymous with the PWG brand. And of course, that long work on the independent scene would finally lead to 2016 when he was picked up by the WWE and would report to the Performance Center, now taking on the new ring name of Aleister Black. Though his first appearance after the name change was made was under the name of Tommy End, he would, of course, be Aleister Black throughout his entire WWE run, and vignettes would begin to air in March of 2017 for the in-ring debut of Aleister Black on NXT TV, and he would indeed make his debut under this dark, mysterious, goth-like gimmick, and picking up major momentum on the yellow brand, as he would get wins over the likes of Andrade, Hideo Itami, and even had a classic with Velveteen Dream, which really put him on the map for WWE fans at TakeOver War Games that year. And in 2018, he would win the NXT Championship for the first and only time in his career, cementing himself as the top guy for NXT at this time. Fans were super behind Aleister Black at this time. He had a cool aesthetic, a cool moveset, was doing good matches, was good and compelling on the mic. This NXT run was a home run for Aleister Black. He would hold the title for about 3.5 months before dropping it to Tommaso Ciampa, and whilst he was not the champion, he would still remain on NXT TV and be a focal point in various storylines like the Johnny Gargano Mystery Attacker story. Himself and Ricochet formed a makeshift tag team, and they won the 2019 Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic, which earned them an NXT tag title shot, but they did not win that. And that would be Aleister Black's final NXT appearance. As just before this, he had actually officially made his main roster debut on Monday Night Raw, continuing that team with Ricochet in just a hot-shotted NXT call-up. They competed for the Raw Tag Team Championships at Fastlane, but they did not win that match. And then at WrestleMania, they then challenged for the SmackDown Tag Championships, but once again, they did not win. So Aleister Black just flip-flopping between Raw and SmackDown right from the beginning, and that trend would continue because as part of the Superstar Shakeup, he was drafted to the Raw brand, but then just a week later, he was drafted back to SmackDown. This was because his real-life wife, Zelina Vega, was wrestling on the SmackDown brand, but it also meant that his now alliance with Ricochet was over. And yeah, man, this SmackDown run sure was a whole lot of nothing, as throughout this entire SmackDown run, all Aleister Black did was sit in a dark room and say that he is waiting for someone to knock on the door and waiting for a challenge. And that's all he did every single week until, you know, like a week before the pay-per-view, some guy would knock, and that would be the match that was made, and then they'd wrestle before he'd repeat the cycle once again. Then later on in that year, he was drafted back to the Raw brand, where he did seem to do a little bit more on Raw. You know, he wasn't just sitting in a dark room for the entirety of his run, and was much more of a focal point on TV, though it still did not live up to his NXT run whatsoever, as maybe the biggest things he did during this Raw run during the pandemic era of the WWE was his feud with Seth Rollins and getting tossed off the top of WWE headquarters by Baron Corbin. And during this year, he would also turn heel for the first time in his WWE run, which also didn't really lead to all that much. And in the 2020 draft, he was once again drafted back to the SmackDown brand. What's really the point in the brand split if you're just going to flip-flop them each year anyway? Give them some time to gel with the new roster members, surely. But following the draft, Aleister Black would just disappear from TV for 6 months unexplained, and when he did return, he was in a feud with Big E, which did actually seem some more interesting. However, the two never got to even have a match because Aleister Black was released right in the middle of it. Yep, on June 2nd, 2021, Aleister Black was officially released from the WWE as part of the many COVID budget cuts, and this was seen as a major fumble by WWE. People really liked Aleister Black. He had an awesome NXT run not even that long ago, and just did nothing on the main roster, not even given a chance. So yeah, this was seen as a total failure from the WWE, And at this stage, in 2021, there was obviously only one other place that Aleister Black was gonna end up in. And that, of course, was All Elite Wrestling, as the now former Aleister Black made his AEW debut on the July 7th, 2021 episode of AEW Dynamite, attacking Cody Rhodes in what was a shocking moment. It was made more shocking by the fact that his release clause was not a 60-day one. He didn't have that active, so he was able to debut immediately on AEW, and that made it for a total surprise. And he would take on the new persona of Malachi Black, and in his first AEW match, he would defeat Cody Rhodes in a huge win. If you don't understand the Codyverse and the control that Cody Rhodes had, that was a big win to be getting. But I mean, obviously in Codyverse fashion, this was totally undone, with Cody Rhodes returning back the win multiple times in the numerous rematches they had. I don't think Malachi won a single match against Cody Rhodes following this. And following his stuff with Cody Rhodes, it was kind of now at limbo once again. It didn't seem like AEW had much ideas for him as a singles competitor, but in early 2022, the House of Black would officially form when he started teaming up with Brody King on AEW, who was his tag team partner in PWG. It's something that had been speculated about happening in AEW for a long while, and now it finally was, and Buddy Matthews, the former Buddy Murphy, would also join the group to officially make them a trio. And then of course they were eventually joined by Julia Hart as well, who made that big character change. And now the House of Black was complete, and I think they were a solid stable. They had the aesthetic nailed, they had good tag team offense, it elevated the guys in there, maybe outside of Malachi, and I mean, we can sure explain why, because despite really having it all there with this stable being the perfect storm, they just weren't booked very well at all. It seemed like AEW was very hesitant to make them look weak, so as a result they just hardly appeared on TV, as AEW I guess also didn't want them going over the people they wanted to. They did have a trios title reign, but this reign totally felt like a here damn reign, because it came right after a whole lot of drama happened with Malachi Black in AEW. As throughout Malachi's Black AEW run, it was rumored multiple times and had been kind of widely accepted that he wasn't going to stay in AEW, and the moment his AEW contract expired, he was going to go right back to WWE, where Triple H was now in control, who seemingly liked him when he used him in NXT, and it was going to work like that, like it had with many other signings at that time for WWE when Triple H took over. And matter of fact, Malachi Black had tried to leave AEW before, as in September of 2022, reports came out that Malachi Black had been granted a conditional release from AEW following a prior release quest the month prior being declined. And the conditions weren't known, but it was known that it was a heavily conditional release, whatever that even means. And Malachi Black himself would stroke the flames when he released his own statement saying that yes, he did indeed request his release from AEW amidst having some personal and private issues behind the scenes. And he also detailed a back injury he'd been dealing with for the better part of a year, as his statement reads, "I did indeed ask for my release. The last 2 years of my life have lended a lot to..." As part of his statement reads, "I did indeed ask for my release. The last 2 years of my life have lended to a lot of setbacks. Both me and my wife have been affected by uncontrollable actions from the outside that resulted in loss of life, medical setbacks, career jeopardizing, the suicide of a close friend, and a close family member almost losing their life. Then experiencing an injury that I was sure was the end of my career, I spent every week going through several sessions of rehab, dry needling, and therapy just to be able to walk and compete. Now this being the tip of the iceberg, and with a combination of promises in my professional field that were not upheld, which resulted as a combination to all of these to a complete demoralization of life and career. This decision has been in my mind for the past 6 months." So a heavily loaded statement there where Malachi goes over a lot of private stuff he's been dealing with, and also kind of touches on promises not being kept in his professional field, seemingly alluding to AEW in some way. But then he also went on to say in this very statement that reports of there being a conditional release were false. So he requested it, but this conditional release that had been reported hadn't actually been granted apparently. He put, "Lastly, I have read a few narratives online in regards to my release, mental health, and my personal life that I can summarize swiftly. If it didn't come from me, it didn't happen. Stuff about conditional releases stuff in my marriage, or using said mental health to leverage the other when, as I said before, that part wasn't even going to be part of the public conversation are false. And Malachi Black would then also take to Instagram Live on September 27th to further clarify and hammer home that no, he had not been released by AEW and was not departing the company, despite most of those initial reports saying there was this conditional release. It's all very confusing.
My stuff about my conditional release, that it's false. So how are you guys still thinking, why are people still writing that I've got my release? Guys, I don't know how like, why do you trust these people to tell you the truth? None of it's confirmed. There's no confirmation because I haven't left. I'm not like, luckily I've been, and that's what this whole thing was about, I've been giving time off by Tony to take care of a bunch of stuff. All this stuff has been cleared up like weeks ago.
It was a strange situation all round, but things went silent and Malachi Black would stay off TV until he did indeed return, and that's when the House of Black won the trios titles, which is why I was kind of saying it seemed like a bit of a here damn reign, because not really much happened in that title reign either. And in around of September of 2023, fans started to take notice to the fact that Malachi Black in his AEW career had not wrestled a singles match in over a full year, and in fact only had 10 singles matches up to that point in his entire AEW career, which just sounded ridiculous, but yes, it was true. And fans would speculate that this was because of his back injury that we mentioned previously, and that he was in a trio with the House of Black to protect him from that, which Malachi Black would then take to Instagram to refute and say wasn't true, as he stated that his back was fine now and he had no idea why AEW wasn't booking him in singles matches, before going on to state he has other injuries too. The trend of no singles matches for Malachi Black was finally broken in February of 2024 when he finally was booked in one, but the conversations around Malachi Black's lack of singles matches in AEW would reignite drama once again at the start of 2024, as AEW fans on New Year's Day, do you guys not have anything better to do that day, were discussing Malachi Black's lack of one-on-ones, as they were talking about how many singles matches other House of Black members had compared to him, with someone replying to that tweet saying that's what happens when you refuse to take a pin or put anyone over. And this reply in particular here, accusing Malachi of refusing to do the JOB in AEW, would prompt a response from the King of the Black Throne himself. Usually I don't reply because these laughable takes from goofballs like this nerd is why this place is the equivalent of people opening their front doors and screaming their excrement-laced opinions into the street. However, bullshit, never happened, isn't a thing, Happy New Year. So the new narrative was that Malachi Black was difficult to work with, and that very much played into why Malachi's run had been a bust, but these claims were vigorously denied by both Malachi and his House of Black member Brody King as well, as throughout 2024 Malachi Black would stay wrestling in trios and tag action with the occasional singles match of course, and his last AEW singles match took place on the 6th of November Dynamite that year against Adam Cole, as after losing the match Malachi Black seemingly broke character to have a moment and embrace Adam Cole after being defeated by him, leading to many fans speculating that Malachi was done with AEW. However, once again, Malachi would come out and respond to this fan speculation saying no, this isn't the case, and he'd continue to wrestle for normal for AEW.
Touchdown, and again, everybody is always retiring. He's retiring because of his injuries and this and that. Well, neither of these things. I'm not injured, nor am I retiring, nor am I leaving.
As his actual last match for AEW was only a month later, as he wrestled it at Full Gear 2024 and was not seen in AEW since then, with it being reported on the 10th of February 2025 that Malachi Black's contract had expired for AEW and he was finally departing from the company. And I mean, let's be real, we all knew exactly where he was going next. And indeed he did, as on the 25th of April SmackDown, he returned once again. As under the Aleister Black ring name once again, he returned to attack The Miz and became a member of the SmackDown roster, and would kick off his return with a feud with The Miz and then Damian Priest, winning both of them, a good start to life. But then after losing the return match to Damian Priest in an ambulance match, what did Aleister Black actually do following this? I genuinely can't think of anything. Well, he formed a little alliance with Zelina Vega, his real-life wife, but it kind of seems like that was only done because Zelina Vega also wasn't doing anything, so they just stuck him together. In February 2026, he would enter a feud with Randy Orton and would trade wins against each other, with him actually pinning Orton just recently in February. You know, Randy Orton being the guy that's about to main event WrestleMania against Cody Rhodes in the world title match, and matter of fact, apparently Aleister Black was actually penciled in to have an alliance with Orton heading into WrestleMania, but of course WWE and TKO decided to use Pat McAfee in that role instead, and Aleister Black was sent to the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal, which of course he didn't even win. And then on the Friday after WrestleMania, the very next week after that Andre the Giant Battle Royal, which ended up being his final match of course, he was released from the WWE alongside Zelina Vega, Kairi Sane, Zoe Stark, and a whole load of other talent as part of WWE's yearly Black Friday releases. And yeah, somehow, some way, his second WWE run was even worse than his AEW run. Make it make sense. Everybody thought that Aleister Black was going to have a home run WWE return because Triple H is now in control again, and he booked him great in NXT, but I guess he just wasn't the priority now. He returned, like I said, he did that feud with Damian Priest and then just floated around on the roster after, until finally it looked like he had something with Randy Orton, and then when they cancelled that, they didn't come up with a plan B for Aleister. They just said, nah, we wish you the best in your future endeavors, brother, see ya. And so yeah, now Malachi Black, Aleister Black, Tommy Yen, whatever you want to call him, is a free agent once again, and the AEW bridge is seemingly burnt, with Captain Sean Dean saying no to the idea of Malachi and Zelina running back the House of Black, and AEW World Champion MJF seemingly alluded to it as well, saying we don't want him. But companies like TNA and MLW, which seem like a good landing spot for Malachi at this point, to me seem kind of beneath him. I think his perfect home was in the WWE, and he's not there now, and they had no idea what to do with him, so what Malachi Black does next in his wrestling career is just totally unknown to me. Like I said, I think the most realistic landing points are TNA or MLW. I wouldn't be surprised to see him appear on either one of those, but man, I just can't believe how that second WWE run went down. I can't believe he was a part of those recent releases. His second run literally lasted less than a year. He came in on the 25th of April 2025 and was released on the 24th of April 2026. Less than a year, man. Just one day. I get it though. And yeah, like I said, what Malachi does next remains unknown, but it's got to be said, he has had a very storied and very strong wrestling career, and it is just kind of baffling that no one has been able to make it work since the NXT days. It seemed like he was set up and teed up perfectly following that NXT run and built up all of this momentum just for nothing. Calvin Bloom signed for the WWE in March of 2019 as he was announced as one of 3 new performance center recruits for the WWE, and this came following a college football stint at the University of Central Florida as he would start wrestling on the NXT house show circuit under a shortened version of his real name, that being Cal Bloom. And like many other PC recruits who were still early in their careers at this time, Cal Bloom was stuck on the NXT house show loop as he spent the first 3 years of his career on NXT live event Limbo, with his first TV appearances not coming until 2020 during the pandemic era as he made some jobber appearances on SmackDown and Main Event, before in September of 2021 he would finally make it onto NXT TV as the NXT brand itself had just gone under a huge rebrand, now being known as NXT 2.0. It was a new era for NXT with a new aesthetic, a new vibe, a new presentation and way of doing things, and most importantly, a new roster as it had been completely reshuffled with many new faces now appearing for the brand that we had never seen before. As the debut episode of NXT 2.0 took place on the 14th of September 2021 episode, and the main event for the show was set to be a 4-way match for the vacant NXT title, as it was Tommaso Ciampa versus Pete Dunne versus LA Knight versus Kyle O'Reilly. However, on the night of the show, it was announced that Kyle O'Reilly is now not available and will not be in the match, as NXT commentary informs us that Von Wagner will be filling in and taking his place. who the fuck is Von Wagner?
Who?
They really announced that Von Wagner was Kyle O'Reilly's replacement like we had any idea who this Von Wagner guy was. Not only had he not appeared on NXT before, but he was wrestling on the live event circuit under a totally different name of Cal Bloom. So yes, Cal Bloom had made it onto NXT TV under the name of Von Wagner, and instantly he was put into a 4-way title match, which of course he didn't win, but what a way to be introduced. Shortly after this, he would start actually teaming with Kyle O'Reilly, of course the man he replaced and was acting as his protege, as reports actually came out around this time that apparently Vince McMahon saw Von Wagner as a future WrestleMania main eventer. That is crazy. His alliance with Kyle O'Reilly was pretty short-lived, as it ended once Kyle O'Reilly was going to be exiting the company to AEW, and Von Wagner would send him out by beating him in a steel cage match in easily the biggest win in his WWE career. But now as a solo act, Von Wagner very much struggled to get over or get any traction in the WWE, as his wrestling just wasn't really impressive if we're being that honest, and he was a bit of a charisma vacuum with no character or real reason to care about him. He was still very much a regular on TV throughout 2022 and 2023, as he featured near weekly on NXT and was still towards the top of the card. He had numerous shots at the North American and World title, he did the Iron Survivor, but NXT just never pulled the trigger with him, and to be honest, there really was no reason to. There were plenty of other new talent during this NXT 2.0 era who got over far quicker than Von Wagner did and were much more compelling and were much better to watch, and it's not exactly like NXT fans were clamoring for that big promised Von Wagner WrestleMania main event push. Nobody really was. As in the summer of 2023, he got into a multi-month feud with Bron Breakker, which saw him getting decapitated with steel steps, and he was written off TV for a bit following this, as when he did come back to TV, he was now a total jobber, and WWE had lost all direction for him, as by this point he had Robert Stone as his manager, and they were just a total jobber act, just two guys who were paired together because neither of them were doing anything on their own. He was relegated to NXT Level Up and was just losing match after match, as his appearances on TV became much more sporadic, and then on April 22nd, 2024, it was revealed that Von Wagner had been released from his WWE contract and was gone from the company, from future WrestleMania main eventer to just fizzling out and being forgotten about completely. And following his release, he appeared to go on a bit of a break from wrestling, but he would return back to wrestling nearly a year later on the Independents, back under the Cal Bloom name, and since then he's been working the Independents semi-regularly, and maybe the biggest thing he's done since his release is he worked a Ring of Honor tag team match, losing to the Gates of Agony. But yeah, it's been all quiet on the happening front. And this really does just demonstrate the brain of Vince McMahon. Bro really saw this guy as a future main eventer and then just got bored. And I mean, it's very questionable as to why he saw him as a main eventer to begin with, and I just kind of think, imagine a parallel universe where that prophecy was fulfilled and Von Wagner actually main evented a WrestleMania. What would wrestling look like if that happened?
Come Tuesday,